Hello, Robs. We're back with Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector, Chapter 16, Under the Man's Protection. Joanna, Joanna, the man thought, awaiting her arrival. Joanna, a simple name, Saint Joanna, so chaste. How innocent and pure she was. He saw her childlike features, her eloquent hands, like those of a blind man. She was not pretty, at least never since manhood had he dreamed of that creature, never awaited her. Perhaps that is why he had pursued her so often in the road, without even waiting for her to look. Perhaps. He couldn't say. He had always enjoyed seeing her. She was not pretty, or perhaps she was. How could one tell? It was so hard to decide. As if he had never seen her before, or never embraced her so often. There was a threat of transformation in her expression, in her movements, from one moment to the next. Even in repose, she was something on the point of raising itself. And what did he now understand and feel so miraculously, as if she had explained it to him? He asked himself. He closed his eyes, his arms outstretched along the sides of the bed, but only until he heard the sound of Joanna's footsteps outside. For he had never dared to relax in her presence. He bent over her, waited upon her every moment, absorbing her, but he never tired, and that attitude didn't make him any less spontaneous. It simply threw him into another kind of spontaneity, hitherto unknown. He was now two different persons, but little by little his new state of being grew and overshadowed the past of the other. He pursed his lips. He felt there was some strange logic in having experienced certain tortures, serene indignities, the careless lack of any route where he might receive Joanna at long last. Not that he had ever been pushed into the mire against his will, not that he considered himself a martyr. He had never awaited the solution, even with the women whom he guarded and abandoned, even with that woman in whose house he had now idly installed himself, even though he could scarcely tolerate her presence, an exhausting and fragile shadow. He had walked on his own feet, his body conscious, experiencing and suffering without any affection for himself, coldly and ingenuously conceding everything to his own curiosity. He even considered himself happy, and now Joanna had come to him. She, Joanna, who? He wanted to add one more word to this muddled thought, the right word, the difficult one, but once again he was struck by the idea that he no longer needed to think, that he needed nothing. She would soon be here. But listen, soon. It was like this. Joanna had liberated him. Increasingly, he needed less in order to live. He thought less, ate less, slept very little. She always existed, and she would soon be here. He closed his eyes more tightly, bit his lips, suffering without knowing why. He opened his eyes immediately, and in the room, that empty room, suddenly he could find no sign of Joanna having been there, as if her existence were a lie. He straightened up. Come, something ardent and mortal called out inside of him. Come, he repeated in a low voice, overcome with fear, looking forlorn. Come. Footsteps, almost silent, were treading the dry leaves outside. Once more Joanna was coming. Once more she could hear him from afar. He remained standing beside the bed, his eyes vacant, a blind man listening to distant music. She was drawing closer and closer. Joanna was coming. Her footsteps became more and more real, the only reality. Joanna, with the suddenness of a stab wound, the pain exploded inside her body, illuminated her with happiness and bewilderment. When the door opened to Joanna, he ceased to exist. He had slipped to the very depths of himself. He hovered in the penumbra of his own unsuspected labyrinth. He now moved lightly, and his gestures were agile and new. The pupils of his eyes became dark and dilated, suddenly transformed into a slender creature, as nervous as a colt. Meanwhile, the atmosphere had become so lucid that he could perceive the slightest movement from any living thing around him. And his body was simply recent memory, where sensations would adapt themselves as if for the first time. The tiny white ship floated over rough waves, green, brilliant, and unruly. He saw her lying there, studying the tiny picture on the wall. On the third, Joanna continued in a soft, clear voice, with small, rounded intervals. On the third, there was a grand parade on behalf of newborn infants. It was amusing to watch people singing and carrying flags, full of all the non-colors. Then a man got up as feeble and swift as the breeze that blows when someone is sad, and calls from afar, "I." No one heard him, but he was almost satisfied. And just then the mighty gale started up that blows from the northeast and trampled over everyone with its great fiery feet. Everyone returned to their homes, wilting and scorched by the heat. They pulled off their shoes, loosened their collars, their blood ran slowly, trickling through their veins, and the most awful feeling of not having anything to do crept into their souls. In the meantime, the earth continued to go round. That was when a little boy was born and given a name. The child was beautiful, enormous eyes that saw, delicate lips that felt, a thin little face that felt, a high forehead that felt. His head large, he walked like someone who really knows the place, slipping effortlessly among the crowd. Anyone following him would arrive. When he was moved, when he was surprised, he shook his head, slowly like this, like someone being offered more than he expected. He was beautiful, and above all, he was alive. And above all, I loved him. I was born, I was born, I was born. Now a verse. The thing I wish for, my darling, is to see you always, my darling. As I saw you today, my darling, even should you die, my darling. Another verse I once heard a flower sing and quietly rejoiced. Then, drawing near, what wonder did I find? Not a singing flower, but a bird hovering there. Joanna's words tailed off as if she were dreaming. Through her half-closed eyes, the ship floated to one side in the picture. The objects in the room were strung out and luminous, one object growing from another. For if we already knew that everything was one, why go on seeing and living? The man, his eyes closed, had buried his head on her shoulder and listened to her dreaming without sleeping. From time to time she heard within the living silence of that summer afternoon muffled, unhurried movements coming from the creaking floorboards. It was the woman, that woman. On those first visits to the big house, Joanna had felt like asking the man the following questions. Is she now like a mother to you? Is she no longer your lover? Even though I exist, does she still want you to live with her? But she had always held back. Meanwhile, the presence of the other woman was so powerful in the house that the three of them formed a couple, and Joanna and the man never felt themselves to be entirely alone. Joanna had also wanted to ask the woman herself, but this had been an earlier thought, for one day she had caught a glimpse of her, the woman's broad shoulders concentrated into an indissoluble lump of anguish beneath her black lace dress. She had also watched her at other fleeting moments, passing from one of the rooms into the lounge, giving a quick smile, rushing off with a horrible expression on her face. Then Joanna had discovered that she was someone alive and black, big ears, sad and heavy, with a dark orifice like a cave. The simpering, furtive, inviting glance of a whore without glory. Her lips moist, chapped, large, smothered in lipstick. How she must love the man. Her hair was fine and sparse and reddish from constant dyeing. And the room where the man slept and received Joanna, that room with curtains, almost free of dust, had in all certainty been tidied up by her. Like someone sewing her own child's shroud, Joanna, that woman, and the teacher's wife. What was it that finally united them, the three diabolical graces? Almonds, Joanna said, turning to the man. The mystery and sweetness of words, almond. Listen, pronounced carefully, the voice placed in the throat, resounding deep down in the mouth. It vibrates, leaves me long and stretched and curved like a bow. Almond, bitter, poisonous, and pure. The three graces, bitter, poisonous, and pure. Remind me of that saying, the man asked her. What saying? The one about the sailor. When you love a sailor, you love the whole wide world." "How awful," Joanna laughed. "I know, I myself said that it must be so true that it has always had that jingle, but I can't remember the rest." He was spending his Sunday in the square. He was on the pier. The man helped her. One day, breaking the silence which he kept up when he was with Joanna, he had tried to make conversation. "I've never been much good." "Yes," she replied, "but everything that's happened wouldn't make you go away." "No. Even this woman, this house, it's different. Can't you see?" "I do. I know that I've always been like a beggar, but I've never asked for anything. There was no need, and I didn't know. But then you came. I used to think nothing was bad, but now, for you're always telling me such crazy things, believe me, I can't." At this point, she raised herself on one elbow, suddenly looking serious, her face bent over him. "Do you believe in me?" "Yes," he replied, startled by her violence. "You know that I don't lie, that I never lie, not even when, not even. Do you hear? Tell me, tell me. Then the rest wouldn't matter, nothing would matter. When I say these things, these crazy things, when I don't want to know about your past and I don't want to tell you anything about myself, when I invent words, when I lie, do you feel that I'm not lying?" Of course, of course." She was stretched out on the bed once more, her eyes closed, weary. "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he doesn't believe me afterwards. If he runs from me like the teacher." Meanwhile, lying here beside him, she could think, and meanwhile is also time. She opened her eyes and smiled at him. A little boy, that's what he is. He must have had many women, been much loved. He's attractive with those long eyelashes, those cold eyes. Before he was harder. I've mellowed him a little. That woman is waiting for me to go away forever one day, for him to return. What was he doing on Sunday in the square? The square is wide and deserted. She finally said slowly, trying to remember in order to answer his question. Yes, so much sun trapped on the ground, as if it came from there. The sea swell, silent and breathless. The fishes on Sunday rapidly twirling their tails and tranquilly continuing to force their way through. A stationary ship, Sunday, the sailors strolling along the pier through the square. A pink dress appearing and disappearing round the corner. The trees crystallized on Sunday. Sunday would remind you of Christmas trees, shining in silence, holding their breath, like so, like so. A man out walking with a woman in a new dress. The man wishes to be nothing. He walks beside her, almost looking into her face, asking, tell me, bully me, trample me. She making no reply, smiling, pure Sunday. Satisfaction, satisfaction. Pure sadness without any heartache. Sadness that seems to come from behind the woman in pink. The sadness of Sunday on the pier, sailors on loan to terra firma. That gentle sadness is proof of living, and since one doesn't know how to make use of this sudden knowledge, there comes sadness. This time the story was different. He complained after a pause. That's because I'm simply narrating when I saw what I saw, not what I'm seeing. I'm incapable of repeating things. I only know things once, she explained to him. It was different, but everything you see is perfect. He wore a chain round his neck with a tiny gold medal. On one side, Saint Teresa, the little flower, and on the other side, Saint Christopher. He revered these two saints. But I don't pay much attention to saints, just occasionally. She had once told him that as a little girl she could spend the whole afternoon playing with one word. So he would ask her to invent some words. She had never loved him more than at such moments. Tell me again what Lalande means, he implored Joanna. It's like angel's tears. Do you know what angel's tears are? A kind of daffodil. The slightest breeze bends it backwards. Lalande also means the sea at dawn, before anyone has set eyes on the shore, before the sun has risen. Each time I say Lalande, you should hear the fresh and salty sea breeze. You should walk the length of the beach, still covered in darkness, slowly, stark naked. In a word, you will feel Lalande. You can trust me. No one knows the sea better than I do. He did not know at certain moments if he was alive or dead, if everything he possessed was little or too much. When she spoke, she would invent like mad, like mad. Plenitude filled him, as great as a charm, and his anguish was that of the clear expanse above the water. Why did he feel intimidated in her presence, as bewildered as a white wall in the moonlight? Or he might suddenly awaken and call out, "Who is this woman? She is superfluous in my life. I can't. I want to turn back, but no longer could." He suddenly sensed in terror, realizing that he was lost. "Dearest," she said, interrupting the man's thoughts. "Yes, yes." He hid his face on that comforting shoulder, and she remained there, listening to his breathing, pervade her back and forth, back and forth. They were both creatures. What else matters, she thought. He moved, rested his head on her bare flesh like an insect, a flea blindly searching for the nucleus, for the living center. Or like a child, outside the world slipped away, and day, then night, then day. She would have gone, she would have to go at some time to tear herself away once more. He too, from her? Yes. Soon she would become a burden to him with her surfeit of miracles. Like other people, inexplicably ashamed of himself, he would long to be off, but as an act of revenge, he would not free himself entirely. He would end up being surprised at himself, compromising himself, haunted by an uncertain and anguished feeling of responsibility. Joanna smiled. He would finish up hating her as if she were demanding something from him, like her aunt, her uncle, who respected her, even though suspecting that she did not enjoy their pleasures. In some confused way, they imagined her to be superior and despised her. Oh God, once more she was remembering, telling her own story to herself, justifying herself. She could ask the man for confirmation. Am I like this? But what did he know? She buried her face on his shoulder, hid herself, possibly happy at that moment, to shake him, to tell him Joanna was man like this. Man! And so she became a woman and grew old. She believed herself to be very powerful and felt happy. So powerful that she imagined she had chosen these paths before venturing there, simply by thinking about them. So unhappy that, believing herself to be powerful, she didn't know what to do with her power, and saw each minute as being lost because she had failed to guide it towards some objective. That's how Joanna grew, man, as tall and slender as a pine tree, and full of courage, too. Her courage had grown inside the room, plunged into darkness, and luminous worlds had formed without fear or shame. She learned from childhood to think, and since she had never seen any human being up close except herself, she was deceived, suffered, lived a painful pride, sometimes superficial but nearly always difficult to bear. How can one end Joanna's story? If she could gather and magnify the look I spied in Lydia, no one will love you. Yes, let's end it like this. Despite her being one of those free and solitary creatures in the world, no one ever thought of giving anything to Joanna. Not love. They always offered her some other sentiment. She lived her life eager as a virgin. That's to say, for the tomb. She asked herself lots of questions, but was never able to provide the answers. She paused in order to listen. How did a triangle come to exist? Was it an idea to begin with, or did that come after it had found its form? Was a triangle fated to exist? Things were beautiful. She would have liked to linger over the question. But love invaded her. Triangle, circle, straight lines, as harmonious and mysterious as a harp. Where is music stored when it isn't playing, she asked herself. And, lost in thought, she replied, let them make a harp from my nerves when I die. The last of Joanna's lucidity merged with the crooked ship moving over the waves. She only had to nod her head for the waves to accompany it. But she had had something. Oh, yes, she had. A husband, breasts, a lover, a house, books, bobbed hair, an aunt, a teacher. Auntie, listen to me. I've met Joanna, the one I'm telling you about. She was a weak woman in relation to things. At times, everything seemed to her to be too precise, untouchable. And sometimes what others used as air for breathing became a burden and death for her. See if you can understand my heroine, Auntie. Listen, she's a vague and bold. She's vague and bold. She doesn't love. No one loves her. You would end up noticing it just as Lydia, another woman, a young woman full of her own destiny, noticed it. However, what's inside Joanna is something stronger than the love one gives, and what's inside her demands more than the love one receives. Do you see what I mean, Auntie? I wouldn't call her a hero like the one I promised Daddy, for in her there was a terrible fear, a fear preceding any judgment or understanding. This has just occurred to me. Who knows? Perhaps faith in future survival comes from noticing that life always leaves us untouched. Do you understand, Auntie? I forgot the interruption of future life. Do you understand? I can see your open eyes watching me with fear, with mistrust, yet wanting, nevertheless, as an affectionate old woman, now dead, it's true, now dead, to love me, overlooking my cruelty. Poor thing. The worst rebellion I ever sensed in you, apart from the ones I provoked, can be summed up in that saying you repeated nearly every day, and which I can still hear, mingled with your scent, which I shall never forget. If only we could go out in the clothes we're wearing. What more can I tell you? I've had my hair cut short, tinted brown. Sometimes I wear it in a fringe. I'm going to die one day. I've also been born. There was the room with the two of them. He was good looking. The room went round a little. It became transparent and warm. A veil that kept coming closer and closer. The three of them formed a couple, but to whom she could never tell this. She would be able to sleep because the man never slept, and he would keep watch like the falling rain. Ottavio was also good looking, with those eyes of his. This was a child, an insect flower's whiteness. Warmth as sleep is for the moment time, for the moment life itself, that later. Everything like the earth, a child Lydia, a child Ottavio, earth de profundis. Okay. And that's 160 pages completed. The next chapter, La Viper. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye.